Fox concocts a crock of shits, so no one can cock block on the plot for apocalypse. Dirty politics far from moderates, paying homage to psychopathic global conglomerates. And the average nigga can't think past what's on his wrist, or flossing whips, so when reality hits it's monstrous. Think it's funny then laugh, got a $30,000 truck and can't afford the money for gas, nigga.
So, you think you've heard enough about 9/11 to know that the government is lying? Maybe you're questioning the events of 9/11, but you still need more information. Go to 911truth.org and click on the link for the 9/11 Truth Store, where you will find the best and latest information out there to educate yourself and others. Available at the store are titles like The New Pearl Harbor by David Ray Griffin and the latest blockbuster DVD, 9/11 Revisited, Scientific and Ethical Questions, featuring BYU physics professor Stephen E. Jones. Get the tools you need to educate yourself and spread the word about the lies of September 11th. Go to 911truth.org and click on the banner for the 9/11 Truth Store. That's 911truth.org. Do it today. In a world dominated by fear and mass manipulation of the media, who can you trust? Just when you think there is no hope alive, you find out that there is an alternative news source to turn to. Revere Radio Network, keeping the dream of sovereignty and freedom alive for all. Revere Radio Network. Spending hours a day tracking down the latest in 9/11 news. Next time, visit 911blogger.com. 911blogger.com is the largest blog on the web, which not only covers, but exclusively focuses on the cover-up surrounding the tragic events of 9/11. Thousands of daily visitors provide 911blogger.com with news tips from all over the world, making the efforts of individuals a forum for the multitudes, searching for answers daily. And while you're at it, check out the latest project, 911podcast.com, hosting all the latest audio and video interviews, news coverage, documentaries, and many more, in many formats, including iPod video compliant formats to please your needs. 911blogger.com, covering 9/11 related alternative news. Ask questions, demand answers.
Visibility 9/11. Here's Michael Woolsey.
Welcome back to Visibility 9/11. I'm your host, Michael Woolsey, and we have on the line with us today Joel Skousen. Joel is a leading conservative voice in American politics today. He writes extensively on state-sponsored terrorism and the problems that we face here in America. Thanks for coming on the program again today, Joel, to share your expertise. Now, in the first part of the program, we talked a little bit about some of the evidence. In this second half, I'd like to just touch briefly on the bigger picture of September 11th false flag terrorist attack. And as I was brought into looking at the 9/11 alternative conspiracy theory, if you will, one of the things that I could not help to look at was the bigger picture. And I feel like, you know, if you want to kill a tree, you've got to get at the roots. And if you hack at branches and leaves, you're never going to get the job done. And so one of the things that I was fortunate enough to be exposed to was this idea that there is a real conspiracy for world government in America today, and that 9/11 fits intricately in with this plan to bring about a world government. And through your writings and hearing you in different interviews, I've heard you talk a lot about world government and this conspiracy. And many people, including myself, had a real hard time getting my hands around this idea that there's been, for a very long time here in America, efforts which would destroy our Constitution. And, as I began to look into it, I realized that there really is an effort to destroy God in America. There's an effort to destroy the Constitution. And, how strong was the Constitution when the founders first put it out that it's taken, almost, over 200 years to destroy?
Well, surprisingly, as a political scientist, I can tell you that the Constitution was not very strong. It's not a tightly worded document. It's, in fact, got holes big enough you can drive socialist trucks through. And they have over the period of time. But it is the fact that there has been an expectation and an understanding of the principles of the Founding Fathers about the Constitution that has made it very difficult for people to take advantage of that general wording. For example, it took, several decades for them to explain away the words "the general welfare," and it took decades for people through public education to forget the general welfare had nothing to do with welfare. It had nothing to do with general welfare in the sense of giving benefits to other people. It's not a socialist catchphrase. The general welfare clause was talking about the general welfare of the people was assumed to mean, and everyone knew it meant, the defense of fundamental rights under common law. That was the general welfare. It had nothing to do with redistribution. And so, of course, in the 1930s, when they used the general welfare clause to justify beginnings of welfare and the welfare state, everyone said, oh, that seems reasonable. It's right there in the Constitution. Well, it really wasn't there. I mean, no one would ever have assumed that, that there wasn't a right to bear arms in the Second Amendment when the Constitution was originally written. But with that said, we've got to remember that there's, it's almost like 9/11 evidence. There are certain things in the Constitution that are absolutely clear, black and white, you shall not do this. And it has taken them that long to overcome those basic, and a lot of those are in the first 10 amendments. I mean, they've literally disregarded the 10th Amendment, which limits the power of the federal government. That was the first to be disregarded. Hardly anyone ever cites that in a Supreme Court case anymore. But in fact, the great power of the Constitution was the fact that it simply did not give power to the federal government to do anything except enumerated powers. Unfortunately, they didn't have a good handle on what the true fundamental rights of men are. The actual civil rights that are listed in the first 10 amendments are really a compilation of civil rights that came out of English common law. Right of habeas corpus, speedy trial, and other things like that. They really didn't have a workable definition of what is the difference between true fundamental rights and false fundamental rights. Socialists, you see, believe that everybody has the right to a job, the right to free health care, the right to food and a basic standard of living, but those are not fundamental rights. Fundamental rights are things that everyone can simultaneously claim at the same time without forcing anyone else to serve their needs. Now, that's a very important definition because it means not everybody can claim the right to an education because you've got to force someone to build the school, someone to do the teaching, someone to pay the salaries. So you're basically enslaving someone to serve your needs, so that can't be a fundamental right. So neither is food, neither is medical care. Life, liberty, property does qualify as a fundamental right because everybody can claim property rightfully gained through their own ownership or their own labor. Through voluntary contracts, they can all claim that because it's separable. There is no conflict between one person and another. And when there are conflicting claims, they can be adjudicable by a court. Socialist claims, socialist rights, rights to food and medical can't be adjudicated. You have to simply enslave one person and say you are required to service the needs of the poor and give them hospital care, and that is a violation of their fundamental rights to keep and control what they own. So the Constitution, you see, had its weaknesses from the very beginning, and frankly, many of the things that we laud in the Constitution as great and wonderful things like separation of powers was in fact not only not brilliant because they've captured all three branches of government now, and so it isn't any longer any, what they had is competing centers of power, but that isn't as good, anywhere near as good, Michael, as writing a tight legal language constitution that specifically prohibits government from doing things. That's much stronger than just saying, well, we'll divvy up some power to the president, to the Congress, and to the Supreme Court so that nobody will have a predominance of power. That works for a while until the powers that be control all three sides, and that's what they've done over the period of the last century and a half, they have slowly got into the place where they control all of the executive. Nobody gets elected to president now except those people deemed, frankly, the presidents are all script readers now, and the real powers that be aren't ever the president. They're the ones handling the president. Dick Cheney's his handler right now, and he's not even the top of the heap, but he is the personal handler of the president. But he is a globalist. He's not a conservative, and there's a difference. And that's why I am reluctant to have myself called as a conservative anymore, because I have to distinguish myself from Bush conservatives. Bush conservatives are supporting globalists, even though they think they're conservative or supporting Republican ideals. The president is a globalist, though a minor one, and he's controlled by globalists who have this agenda of getting America into a globalist New World Order, and they're trying to do that ever so slowly through piecemeal legislation, through NAFTA, GATT, the World Trade Organization, and other such international regional organizations. But they're never going to be able to get there, and this is part of my general theory, which is on my website under the title Strategic Threats of the Coming Decade. The general theory states that you can't get people to actually give up final sovereignty without a huge crisis to drive them into it. This is the Hegelian philosophy of creating and managing conflict so that you drive people to do things which they would not normally accept outside of the crisis. So it is my belief in the larger picture that 9/11 was created as a new Pearl Harbor in order to drive Americans into accepting, one, an interminate war on terror, which we're still in, which has been morphed into attacking countries like Iraq in the name of democracy. The president still comes back to this is part of the war on terror, which has never been substantiated. Even the war in Afghanistan really had nothing to do with the war on terror. Those training camps, I can guarantee you, which, by the way, were run and financed by the CIA, they claimed that they lost control of al-Qaeda. But those terrorist training camps, I said to my wife, those are going to be empty by the time they declare war on the terrorists in Afghanistan. And sure enough, they were. There wasn't anything to find there. In fact, there were satellite photos of that the U.S. had of the Arab contingents of al-Qaeda escaping out to Iran and back to Saudi Arabia, taking shipping at the various ports, and they failed to interdict them. Now, obviously, the U.S. could have done that with military air power during the invasion of Afghanistan, but they chose not to. They did not even acknowledge that they had the satellite photos of this embarkation of the Arab contingents of al-Qaeda. But obviously, to me, that's evidence that they were protecting al-Qaeda, or protecting at least the Arab contingents of that, because this is what we call controlled terrorism. You know, the great proof that we don't really have a war on terror is the fact that we have wide open borders, and we have no terrorists walking across the border doing daily small acts of terrorism that are easy to do and cheap to do. Vice President Cheney says he's got al-Qaeda on the run, and that's why they aren't coming into the United States. That's baloney. Israel has 100 times more security at the borders than we do, and they have weekly terrorist attacks. They can still get through the border. You can't tell me that we have real terrorism. This is controlled terrorism, and that's why we only have high-profile events, because they are what justifies the government, without inconveniencing a large portion of the population, justifies taking away a great portion of the civil rights which are going to be necessary to shut down the criticisms of government. People like you and I, people that are calling for that these acts of controlled terrorism, high-profile terrorism, are treason on the part of our government leaders, we're the ones that are going to be targeted someday for the loss of our civil rights, and this depriving of habeas corpus and other things are essential to doing that, and as well as accustoming the American people to getting used to the legal loss of those rights. And that's why we have these continual small provocations of terrorism, the phony mixing of chemicals on the British flights, which, we're still living with those idiotic restrictions on flying to this day. Those types of provoked terrorist events and the planting of bombs on subway trains and then blaming it on backpackers in the subways, those are the things that are agent provocateurs working to destroy the civil rights to keep people from protesting, government tyranny at a day when they'll need to do so.
So why do you think that they haven't just thrown everything, all caution to the wind, and staged another major false flag terrorist event and just destroyed